Fort Jackson, South Carolina, 1831 hours. The motor pool smelled like diesel and hot concrete in something that had no name, but every soldier recognized the particular stillness that descended over a crowd when they had just witnessed something they could not explain. Sergeant Derek Crane lay on his back between two overturned fuel crates, 235 pounds of marine reduced to a man staring at a South Carolina sky gone purple at the edges. His chest moved. Slowly. The rest of him did not. Corporal Leo Voss stood 10 feet away. He had not moved in 30 seconds. His mouth was open, and he did not know it. Around them, 40 soldiers stood in a rough arc. None of them were talking. A few had stopped blinking. The kind of silence that fell when something happened that broke a person's working model of how the world operated, and they needed a moment before they could begin rebuilding it. Two medics were running across the lot from the eastern gate. Nobody had called them. Somebody had. Narrator. Nobody on Fort Jackson thought it could happen twice. One man knew it would. He just did not say anything because some things you did not announce. You waited for people to see for themselves. 11 hours earlier, 7:30. The sun was still low when she arrived. That was the detail nobody mentioned afterward. Not in the official reports, not in the conversations that moved across Fort Jackson like smoke through a barracks hallway. Nobody mentioned that the light was still coming in sideways, still thin and angular, in the way of early morning light, that made everything feel slightly provisional, as though the day had not yet committed to being real. She came through the main gate at 0728 with a black duffel bag over one shoulder and a single sheet of transfer orders folded in the breast pocket of her shirt. No rank insignia on the collar, no unit patch on the sleeve. The kind of clothing that communicated nothing on purpose, assembled by someone who understood that the most effective camouflage in an institutional setting was the appearance of belonging without distinction. The gate guard, a young specialist who had not yet turned 21, looked at her orders and looked at her and looked at her orders again. The orders were correct. The credentials were correct. Everything that was supposed to be there was there. He could not have said what it was that made him look twice. She waited, patient, quiet. The kind of patience that did not feel like waiting at all because it carried no impatience underneath it. He handed the papers back and waved her through. She walked across the gravel lot toward the main complex with the same even unhurried pace she had carried through dozens of forward operating bases and classified facilities and places that did not appear on briefing maps. The duffel did not seem to bother her shoulder, despite the fact that anyone who looked carefully would have noticed it was not as light as it appeared. She covered 200 yards to the administration building without checking her phone, without consulting signage, without any of the small navigational hesitations that marked a person finding their way. She knew exactly where she was going. Her name, according to the transfer sheet, was Commander Dara Reeves, Logistics and Intelligence Support, assigned temporarily to Fort Jackson by order of JSOC Administrative Command. The sheet offered nothing further. No previous posting, no commendations, no background beyond rank and name. On paper, she was unremarkable. Her father's name was James Reeves, Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy SEAL Team 6. In 31 years of service, he had operated in places that did not make it onto briefing maps and accomplished things that would not appear in documents cleared for general review for at least 2 more decades. The men who had served alongside him did not talk about him the way soldiers usually talked about legends, with exaggeration and noise. They talked about him quietly, carefully. The way a person talked about something they had respected so much, it had frightened them a little. His call sign was Ghost. He died in 2019 in circumstances that remain classified. He was 61 years old and he was still active when he died. Dara had learned to shoot from her father on a beach in Coronado when she was 9 years old. Not a toy, not a training replica. A real rifle reduced loads, his hands steady over hers on the sand, his voice close and even at her ear. "You do not do this to show anyone," he told her. "You do this so you never need to." She was 9 years old and she understood exactly what he meant. By the time she joined the Navy at 22, after 4 years of the kind of formal education her father had insisted upon, and she had pursued with the same systematic attention she brought to everything, she had already spent more hours in field conditions than most enlisted personnel saw in their first 2 years of service. By the time she earned her Trident, a process that removed candidates from the program at a rate that never stopped being brutal, regardless of preparation, she had a foundation that her instructors did not entirely know what to make of. They pushed her. She absorbed the push and returned the next morning. They pushed harder. She came back again. 25 years of service. operations and locations she could not name in conversation, a record that existed behind encryption layers that most people in the military did not know to look for. They gave her the call sign Ghost when she was 32, after an operation in which she entered a building, completed the mission, and exited without a single person inside knowing she had been present. She told two people about the operation afterward. One of them was her father. He did not say he was proud. He poured 2 cups of coffee, handed one to her, and sat with her in the kitchen in Virginia Beach without speaking for a while. When he got up to leave, he put his hand briefly on her shoulder. That was more than enough. She walked into the Fort Jackson Administration Building at 0731, checked in with the duty sergeant, accepted her temporary billet assignment, and started toward the barracks. She made it halfway across the courtyard. Derek Crane was 34 years old and built like something load-bearing. 6'2", 235 pounds, 12 years in the Marine Corps. He moved through spaces with the unconscious confidence of a man whose size had spent years doing preliminary work for him, clearing a perimeter of deference before he arrived. He had been passed over for promotion twice. The official evaluations used careful bureaucratic language designed to communicate something significant without stating it plainly. Behavioral concerns, interpersonal friction with subordinates, difficulty operating within collaborative command structures. What it meant in direct language was that he used rank as a weapon, and the people above him had decided not to give him more of it. This had not produced reflection. It had produced a harder version of what was already there. He was crossing the courtyard with Corporal Leo Voss 2 steps behind him when he spotted her. New arrival, small, no unit identification on the sleeve, walking toward the East Barracks with the purposeful calm of someone who knew where she was going. He smirked, said 2 words to fresh meat, quiet almost to himself. Voss gave the short, uncomfortable laugh of a 22-year-old who had not yet understood the difference between loyalty and imitation. Crane changed direction. She heard his boots on the gravel before he spoke, recognized the cadence, deliberate, heavier than necessary, the walk of a man who wanted to be heard approaching. She kept her pace even and did not look up early. When he was 10 feet away, she said morning before he had a chance to set the terms of the conversation. The small displacement, her speaking first, did not stop him. It was too small for that. But something in his eyes registered it. "You must be lost," he said. He was close now, closer than any conversation required. She looked at him with the steadiness of a person who had faced down things considerably more dangerous in considerably darker places. Not hostility, not deference, just a level, patient attention. "I know where I am," she said. "Reporting to my assigned CO." He tilted his head, said the words back slowly like they were mildly amusing. Then he said he was her CO until he decided otherwise. His voice dropped into the register he used when he wanted the air to change. "When I am talking," he said, "you do not move unless I say so." She studied him the way she studied everything, completely and without the information changing her expression. "Sergeant," she said, "I'm going to suggest we end this here." He closed the last foot of space between them. Said or what, with the nearness of it doing the work his volume was not doing. He wanted her to register the geometry of the situation, the size differential, the math that he believed did not favor her. His hand closed around her forearm. "You are on my base now," he said. "And if you do not understand that," his grip tightened, "you will die now." The words were intended to be the end of the conversation. They were not. What happened next took 1.4 seconds. She did not flinch. There was no gathering of tension in her body, no preliminary shift in weight that might have served as a warning. One moment she was standing with his hand on her arm. Then her right foot planted, her shoulder rotated, and the leverage she applied to his wrist and elbow was not a matter of strength. It was a matter of physics applied with absolute precision by a nervous system that had been rehearsing it for 25 years. His center of gravity traveled upward before it went violently downward. 235 pounds of Marine left the ground. He hit the concrete on his back with a sound that had no comfortable comparison. Every cubic inch of air left his body simultaneously. His eyes went wide and stayed that way. Voss blinked and missed the transition entirely. One moment Crane was standing. The next he was on the ground and the woman was 2 feet away with her breathing unchanged and her bag still on her shoulder. A small group of soldiers crossing the courtyard had stopped. Nobody spoke. She gave Crane 4 seconds, long enough to confirm he was not in medical distress, long enough for everyone watching to understand that she was waiting, not retreating. Then she reached into the duffel. She produced a matte black badge case and set it on Crane's chest. His hands found it on an instinct. His fingers opened it with the unsteady coordination of a man whose nervous system was still rebooting from a fall it had not anticipated. Inside a gold insignia that most personnel at Fort Jackson had never encountered outside of a photograph. SEAL Team Valor Credential, Black Operations Division, and at the bottom in cold stamped lettering, Commander Dara Reeves, 25 years active service. The silence in the courtyard changed weight. You have placed your hands on a superior officer, she said. That is the first mistake. The second was the threat. She settled the duffel on her shoulder. Next time, she said, learn something about the person before you decide who they are. She walked away. Crane lay on the gravel and said nothing because nothing was available to him. His shoulder was wrong. His wrist was relaying information his brain was not ready to receive. In his peripheral vision, he could see the soldiers who had watched and the specific quality of their careful not looking, which was its own form of damage. Voss had not moved, but his eyes were not on the badge case. They were on the woman walking across the courtyard, and his face held an expression that was not about what everyone else in the courtyard was processing. He was not surprised by the capability. He was not calculating the outcome. He was looking at her the way a person looked at something they had almost recognized. A name heard years ago in a specific context that had lodged somewhere deep and was now trying to surface. Colt Mercer heard about it at 0748. He was in the office adjacent to the training facility when one of his NCOs gave him the 30-second version. Female officer, new transfer logistics designation, put Crane on the ground in under 2 seconds, SEAL credentials out of the duffel, Black Division clearance on the badge. Mercer listened without expression. He asked one question. What unit did the orders come from? The NCO did not know. Mercer told him that was all. When the NCO left, Mercer sat and looked at the wall for a moment. A logistics tag with JSOC clearance and SEAL Black Division credentials did not walk into Fort Jackson on a routine rotation. That combination meant someone had decided this installation required a specific kind of attention, and they had sent a specific kind of person to provide it. He did not know what that meant yet. He knew that the correct professional response was to observe before drawing conclusions. He pulled up the security camera system on his terminal and found the courtyard footage. He watched the interaction once at full speed. Then he went back to the moment of the throw and watched it at a quarter of the normal rate. He sat with that for a long moment. In 20 years of studying how people moved under pressure, he had never seen a takedown executed without a tell. Every trained fighter had one. A shoulder that dropped a fraction of a second early, a weight shift that preceded the pivot. Even the best candidates he had run through advanced combat programs had something readable in the moment before the action. Some trace of the decision being made by a body that was still partly operating in the domain of thought rather than pure training. She had none of those, which meant the capability was not recent. It was not a skill she had built to a high level and maintained. It was something older and more fundamental than that. Something that had been part of her physical vocabulary long enough that it no longer passed through the intermediate layer of conscious execution. He closed the footage window. He opened a small notebook from his upper left desk drawer and wrote one line. Then he went back to his work. By 0900, the story had moved through every corner of Fort Jackson. Not through any announcement, through the specific, invisible, highly efficient channel of soldiers talking to other soldiers in hallways and supply lines and brief intersections beside equipment bays. It moved faster than any official communication and arrived with more granular detail than most briefings. The version most people received was accurate in its essentials and slightly expanded in its particulars. Crane's time in the air, extended his landing, made more resonant, but the core remained intact. A woman who weighed 134 pounds had put Sergeant Crane on the ground in front of witnesses before he had fully processed that it was happening, and she had done it without raising her voice. Crane spent the morning in the medical facility. His shoulder was dislocated. His wrist had a hairline fracture that the physician explained would require 6 to 8 weeks of managed recovery. He sat on the examination table while the shoulder was reset and said very little. Before the physician arrived, he made a phone call. It lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. The man on the other end was named Pollard, a JAG officer Crane had known from a posting in North Carolina 6 years earlier. Crane laid out the situation in the flat, deliberate register he used when he was working rather than reacting. A superior officer had engaged in unprovoked physical contact during a routine interaction. There were witnesses. He wanted to understand his options under Article 128 before Base Command had an opportunity to construct the official narrative. Pollard asked who the officer was. Crane told him. A pause. Longer than the question warranted. Pollard said he would look into it. He said it the way careful men said things they were not certain about in language that communicated something other than its surface meaning. He said he would be in touch. Crane set the phone down. He was not a man who spent time in self-examination, but he had enough operational clarity to understand that the morning had not gone the way he had proceeded because he had categorized a situation before acquiring the information necessary to categorize it. He had looked at a small woman with a single-page transfer sheet in a duffel bag and had made a decision that cost him his shoulder and his wrist and the particular currency of a man whose authority depended entirely on other people not being willing to question it. That was a mistake of the kind he did not make twice. He knew her name now. He knew the designation on the badge. He knew the general shape of what she was. What he did not know was why she was here. That was the question that mattered. Not who she was, not what she had done to him in the courtyard, which was a problem he intended to address through the appropriate channels. What mattered was why a SEAL commander with Black Division clearance and a logistics cover had been transferred to Fort Jackson on a Monday morning without any of the preliminary signals that accompanied official inspections or joint operations. The longer he thought about it, the more certain he became that the answer was something he needed to find before she did. Colonel Wick Hargrove's office was on the second floor of the administration building with a view of the south training fields, and beyond them the tree line separating the base from the civilian road. He was 60 years old and had the face of a man who had spent enough time in difficult conditions that the difficulty had become simply part of his constitution, rather than something worn on the surface. He had served in the Gulf and afterward in advisory roles that had taken him through most of the CENTCOM theater. He was not a man who was impressed easily, and he was not a man who pretended to be more certain than he was. When Dara knocked on his open door at 09:30, he stood up. Not because protocol required it. He had been in the institution long enough to know the difference between the times when protocol was a formality and the times when it was the right thing. This was the latter. "Commander," he said. She stepped in and closed the door. She took the chair he indicated. She noticed without remarking on it that he had used her rank without consulting any papers on his desk. He had known it before she walked in. "Your father served with the 7th Group in '98, he said. "I was on the Joint Task Force coordination side. We overlapped for about 4 months. She looked at him steadily. "He told me," Hargrove continued, "that if his daughter ever walked into one of my commands, the most useful thing I could do was stay out of her way and make sure nobody else interfered with her work." She did not respond immediately. She took a breath. "I read the report from this morning," Hargrove said. "Crane has 3 documented complaints in the past 12 months. This one is not going to strengthen his position." "That is not what I came here to address," she said. "I know what you came here to address," he said, "and I want you to have what you need." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside a base access authorization for the internal logistics and financial records, the kind of document that normally required 2 weeks and 3 signatures. He had it ready before she arrived. She opened it, looked at it, then at him. He shrugged slightly. "James talked about you," he said. "Not about operations, about who you were. He said you paid attention to things other people walked past." She closed the folder. "There is one thing you should know," Hargrove said. His voice shifted to a more careful register. "The transfer orders that brought you here, the routing codes at the bottom." She waited. "They did not come through the standard JSOC administrative chain," he said. "Someone inside the base systems generated them. Someone with enough access and knowledge of JSOC formatting conventions to replicate them accurately. The request for you specifically by name and call sign originated from within this installation." She did not look surprised, but something behind her eyes went very still. "Do you know who?" she said. "Not yet," Hargrove said, "but whoever it is knew you were coming. Which means they either wanted you here for a reason, or they wanted to create a situation involving you before you had a chance to begin your work." She stood, picked up the folder. "Then they have made an error in judgment," she said. She walked out. In the corridor outside Hargrove's office, she stopped. She stood against the wall, alone, the folder in her hand, the building sounds moving around her. Footsteps 2 floors below, a radio somewhere, the low constant hum of a large climate system working against the South Carolina morning. She thought about her father, not about his death, not about the classified record. She thought about his voice, about the quality of his patience, the way he had been able to sit with difficult information for a long time without letting it consume him, turning it slowly until he understood its shape. He had tried to teach her that. She had learned most of it. She put the folder in her duffel and started down the hallway. The temporary office she had been assigned was a small room near the East Logistics Hub, a desk, a terminal, a window that looked out over the motor pool. By 1100, she had later accessed credentials on the desk and was working through the base financial routing logs when a knock came. "Come in," she said. It was Voss. Leo Voss, 22 years old, Crane's corporal. He had removed his cover before entering, which at minimum indicated someone had taught him that much. He stood in the doorway without fully committing to the room. She looked at him. He had the same expression he had worn in the courtyard after the badge came out, that unresolved quality like something trying to surface. "I am not here because of this morning," he said, as though he needed to establish that first. She waited. He took 2 steps into the room. He turned his cover in both hands without knowing he was doing it. "My father's name was Gerald Voss," he said. "He served in Iraq, 1st Cavalry Division. He was in Fallujah in November 2007. His unit was clearing a building and the structure started coming down. Most of them made it out. My father was on the 3rd floor and the stairwell was gone." She was completely still. "Someone went in and got him out," Voss said. He described it sometimes. Not often. He said the person was small, that they did not say anything during the entire operation. Not coming in, not pulling him down through the debris, not when they reached the street. He said that was the strangest part of it. All that fire and structural collapse around them, and this person was just entirely quiet, like the situation had no claim on them. He looked at her directly for the first time. He never knew the name, Voss said. He just knew the call sign. Someone told him afterward. He said it was Ghost. The room was very quiet. She held his gaze for a long moment. Her expression was controlled, but something in it moved through a register that did not fit neatly into operational language. "How is your father?" she asked. Voss turned his cover in his hands. "He died in 2020, he said. But he had 13 years he would not have had otherwise. He was specific about that. He said it regularly, that he had been given 13 years he had not earned and he tried to use them right." She held his gaze. He did, she said. It was not a question. Voss nodded once. His jaw was tight in the way of a young man holding something together that required effort. "I just wanted to say," he began. Then he stopped. Whatever he had prepared did not fit the moment the way he had imagined it would when he was rehearsing it. "You do not have to," she said. He nodded. Put his cover back on, turned to leave. "Voss," she said. He stopped. "Whatever Crane is planning," she said, "stay out of it." He looked at her. "Not because it will go wrong for him," she said, "because it is not who you are." He was quiet for a moment. Then he left. She sat at the desk for a long time after he was gone. The terminal was open. The logistics records were waiting. The folder from Hargrove sat at the edge of the desk with the routing codes that did not trace back to where they should. She put her right hand flat on the desk, breathed in for 4 counts, held for 7, released for 8. Her father had shown her the technique in their kitchen in Virginia Beach when she was 30 years old and had come back from something she could not describe. "It works," he had said, "not because of anything complicated, because counting gives the nervous system something concrete to do while the rest of you finds its footing." Then she went to work. The call Crane made from the medical facility lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He made it at 09:47 with his shoulder reset and his wrist wrapped in a soft cast and the physician temporarily absent. The man on the other end was Pollard, the JAG contact, and Crane laid it out in the flat, deliberate way he laid things out when he was thinking rather than reacting. The response he received was not the response he had anticipated. The pause before Pollard answered. The careful quality of the words that followed. These told him something he needed to hear, which was that the name he had given had produced a reaction even in a JAG officer who had seen most things. He set the phone down. He had enough operational intelligence to understand that the morning had not failed because he had been outmatched. It had failed because he had operated without information. He had assessed a situation on surface data, and the surface data had been completely misleading. That was an error he corrected by acquiring better information before acting again. He knew her name. He knew the designation on the credential. He knew the general nature of what she was, even if the specifics sat behind clearances he could not reach. What he did not know was why she was here. He thought about that through the entire morning while the medical staff moved around him. He thought about it with the cold, patient attention of a man who had learned that problems responded better to patience than to force when force was not an option. The longer he thought about it, the more clearly he understood that the question of why she was here was not separate from the question of what he had been doing for the past 14 months. When the physician left the room for the final time that morning, Crane sat alone and made a second call. Shorter. 3 people. A staff sergeant named Burkett, a corporal named Oakes, a private first class named Dillard. He told them where to be at 18:15. He did not tell them why. Colt Mercer ran his afternoon training session with the same economy he brought to everything. Field by 1300 rotation through 3 stations, 3 corrections delivered without volume back in his office by 1545. He pulled up the courtyard footage again. This time he watched the complete interaction from the beginning. Not just the throw, he watched her walk. He watched the moment she heard Crane's boots and did not look up. He watched 60 seconds of body language from both of them before the contact. Then he watched the throw at quarter speed for the second time. He was not watching it with the uncomplicated amazement of someone who had seen something outside their experience. He was watching it the way he watched everything that mattered, with the patient, trained attention of a man who had spent 20 years studying how people moved under pressure and who understood that what was absent from a movement could be more informative than what was present. She had no tell, no preparatory micro-movement, no weight shift preceding the pivot. In the hundreds of soldiers he had trained in advanced combat programs, he had never seen a takedown executed without one. Even the most accomplished had something, some trace of the decision being processed before the body fully committed to it. She had nothing, which meant the action was not executing through the decision-making layer at all. It was older than that, deeper, the kind of capability built not over years but over decades in conditions where a telegraphed movement was the difference between a completed mission and a body bag. He closed the footage. He wrote a second line in the notebook. By 1700, the day had moved into its later register. The training fields were quieting. The mess hall was filling. Crane had not returned to duty. He had, however, made contact with Burkett and Oakes and Dillard, not friends precisely. Men who had found in Crane's gravity something that substituted for direction and who had not yet developed the independent judgment to understand what that substitution was costing them. Dara was still at the terminal when the sounds reached her at 1810. Raised voices from the direction of the motor pool, the specific register of stage disorder. She closed the terminal and was there in 90 seconds. What she found had been arranged. Crane stood at the center of it, the sling the one concession to the morning, his voice at a controlled volume, loud enough to command attention, not loud enough to be characterized later as a breakdown. Around him, Burkett and Oakes and Dillard occupied positions that looked random but were not. And in front of Crane, a base mechanic named Fowler stood with the expression of a man who had absolutely no idea what was happening to him. The accusation was specific. It had dates and technical terminology and the surface texture of something researched. It was, as Dara assessed in the first 4 seconds of observation, completely constructed. She stepped forward. "Sergeant Crane," she said. He turned, and in the turn she saw what she had expected. He was not startled. He had known she would come, which meant he had known her office window looked over the motor pool, which meant someone had told him her assignment. That was a separate problem. She filed it and stayed present. "Stand down," she said. His jaw moved. Something cold settled into his eyes. "You think you can walk around this base like you own it," he said. His voice was no longer at the controlled volume. He was talking for the audience, now the 30 soldiers who had gathered at the perimeter drawn by the oldest signals in human behavior. "You cost me a shoulder. You went to Hargrove before I had a chance to respond. You have been here one morning and you are already deciding how this installation runs." She held her ground. Her voice stayed even. "You are making this worse," she said. "For yourself, right now, that is still a choice you can reverse." He laughed, the kind of laugh that had nothing behind it. She saw Voss, standing at the rear edge of the crowd behind where Burkett and Oakes were positioned. He was 6 feet to the left of where Crane would have expected him to be. A small displacement. Nobody else in the motor pool had probably registered it. She registered it. Crane moved, not the direct charge of the courtyard. He had learned something. He came at an angle using his size, trying to work her into a corner against the side of a vehicle where her options would narrow. She did not go into the corner. She moved laterally, pulling him past her, and as he passed, she delivered 3 strikes in a sequence that took less than 2 seconds. The first to his already fractured wrist-open palm, redirecting rather than damaging. The second to the side of his knee, controlled enough to destroy his base. The third to the solar plexus, the heel of her hand, complete commitment. He folded, not the backward throw of the courtyard. A collapse. He went to his knees first, then his good hand, and stayed there while his diaphragm worked through its temporary failure. In the lateral movement, she had taken contact she had not fully anticipated. The corner bracket of an open vehicle door, steel edge at the height of her lower right ribs. She felt it immediately, not pain precisely, not yet. A specific deep pressure she recognized from 2011 from Kandahar when a structural element had come across the same side during an extraction that had gone wrong in its final 30 seconds. The tissue around two lower ribs had never fully recovered from that night. What she had just done to it would require weeks to quiet. She would measure every deep breath for at least that long. She straightened. She gave no indication of what she had absorbed. She looked at the crowd around her. "Let this be a lesson," she said. Not loudly, she did not need volume. The motor pool was completely quiet. Respect is not won through intimidation. It never was. It never will be. She looked at Fowler. "You are done here," she said. "Go." He went. She looked at Burkett and Oakes and Dillard in turn. They had the expressions of men who had understood in the past 2 minutes that they had miscalculated what they were participating in. "Go," she said. They went. She looked at Voss. He was already separated from the position he would have occupied if he had stayed where Crane expected him. He met her gaze. Nothing passed between them in words. But something passed. Then Mercer was at the edge of the motor pool, and two MPs were coming from the eastern gate, and the situation had reached the point where the institutional machinery would take over. She stepped back and let it. Crane was helped to his feet. He did not speak. His face had the controlled quality of a man directing all available energy toward not revealing what was happening internally. He let the MPs walk him toward the medical facility without looking back. Mercer stood at the perimeter until the crowd dispersed. He stood with his arms at his sides and watched not where Crane had been, but where Dara had been standing when she delivered the 3 strikes. The geometry of it, the way she had managed not just the outcome, but the optics, ensuring that every person present had seen clearly that she had not moved first, that she had offered him the chance to stop, that the 3 strikes were the minimum necessary and not one thing more. He had also seen the contact with the vehicle door. He had seen the subsequent recalibration in how she carried her right side, barely perceptible. But he had spent 20 years watching how people moved, and he knew what it looked like when someone absorbed something significant and decided that the situation around them was more important than what was happening inside them. He said nothing about it. He went back to his office and wrote a 3rd line in the notebook. Dara was at the terminal at 1900 with the lights at half. Her right side was informing her of its condition with steady particular clarity. She had taken 3 deep breaths since sitting down, and all 3 had arrived with the same companion sensation. This was not a new injury being created. This was an old one reactivated. She had known since 2011 the difference between those 2 categories. She put it aside and looked at the screen. She was in the 4th anomaly when Voss knocked. The same knock, slightly tentative, sufficiently deliberate. "Come in," he entered. In uniform this time, he was holding something. A standard manila envelope worn slightly at the edges, the kind of envelope that had spent time in a drawer or a storage box. He set it on the desk in front of her without speaking first. "My father left this," he said, "when he died. He had specific instructions for where certain things should go. Most of them were distributed immediately. But this one, he said, was for Ghost. He had an address at JAG and a description that did not match anyone I could locate. He had written it in the formal instructions he left with his attorney." She looked at the envelope. Her name was not on it, just the call sign written in the careful handwriting of a man who had been deliberate about it. "I found out last month that Ghost was a real person," Voss continued. "Someone from my father's old unit finally told me. They gave me the call sign but not the name. They said the individual was Navy and had gone into classified operations after the Fallujah rotation, and there was no accessible record." He stopped, looked at the envelope. "Then I was assigned to Fort Jackson," he said, "and this morning happened." She picked up the envelope. The seal had been reinforced with tape yellowed slightly with age. She broke it carefully and removed the contents. 3 pages handwritten on legal paper in the same careful hand as the envelope's exterior. She read. The room was quiet while she read. What the pages contained was a first-hand account. Gerald Voss describing something he had witnessed during a stateside temporary duty assignment at a South Carolina CONUS base in the fall of 2018. A supply coordination role. During that assignment, he had observed a pattern in the logistics operation. Requisitions processed for equipment that did not arrive. Paperwork filed correctly. Signatures obtained. Budget lines cleared. No discrepancy on the surface. He had asked a question once to a senior NCO he believed he could trust. The deflection he received told him the deflection itself was significant. He had written it down because he was the kind of man who wrote things down. He had addressed it to Ghost because Ghost was the only person he could be certain with complete confidence would not be compromised. She set the pages down. She looked at the routing codes she had marked on the printed financial records. She looked at Gerald Voss's account. She looked at the dates. The dates overlapped. Not precisely, but in the way that things overlapped when they were describing the same pattern from two different angles. Voss was watching her. Your father was a careful man, she said. He nodded. He was right not to open it, she said. She placed the pages back in the envelope and set it beside the printed financial records. Then she looked at Voss directly. You stepped away tonight, she said, at the motor pool. Voss said nothing. I know what it costs to do that, she said, in the environment you are in, with the people watching. Voss looked at the window. My father told me, he said slowly, that the hardest thing in the military was not the physical training or the combat work. He said the hardest thing was figuring out who was actually worth following. He said most people never worked that out and spent their entire careers following whoever was loudest. He stopped. I think I figured it out this morning, he said. She held that for a moment. Go get some sleep, she said. He left. She sat with the room for a long time afterward. The routing codes on the desk. Gerald Voss's pages in the envelope. Somewhere on this base, Crane was in the medical facility for the second time in one day. And somewhere on this base, someone had known she was coming. She pulled up the base personnel roster on the terminal. She filtered for personnel with prior JSOC administrative experience. The filter returned 11 names. She eliminated 9 based on posting history and timeline. The pattern in the financial records went back 14 months, which meant whoever was running it had established it almost immediately upon arriving at Fort Jackson. That required both physical presence and institutional access from the point of origin. That left 2 names. She looked at the list. She opened the base camera system and found the footage from the administration building's main corridor at 7:12 that morning, 16 minutes before she had walked through the front gate. At 7:12, a figure in civilian contractor clothing exited the administration building through the side door. She could not see the face clearly, but she could see the build, the gait, the way of occupying space that remained consistent regardless of clothing. She had seen it twice that day already, once in the courtyard, once in the motor pool. The side exit connected the administration wing to the base logistics coordination offices. The section where her assignment and office location would have been processed as part of incoming credential verification. Crane had known she was coming. He had been in the logistics coordination offices 16 minutes before she arrived. The confrontation in the courtyard had not been the spontaneous aggression of a man with poor impulse control. It had been an attempt made before she could reach her terminal and her access authorization to establish a situation that would complicate her standing before her work began. She sat back. The motor pool escalation, the JAG contact, all of it reframed. She was not dealing with a sergeant who could not manage his anger. She was dealing with a man who was afraid of what she would find. Afraid men who had been operating carefully for 14 months did not become careless when cornered. They became careful in a different direction. She picked up her phone and called Hargrove. He answered on the second ring. It was past 2,000 hours. I need an audit hold on the base financial systems effective tonight, she said. The logistics routing database specifically, and I need it done without notifying administrative staff until morning. A pause, 20 minutes, Hargrove said. Then after a beat, you found something, the shape of something, she said. Is it small, he asked. No, she said. She set the phone down. She looked at the desk, the envelope, the printed pages, the name on the personnel roster with the posting history that matched in every relevant detail. Outside the window, Fort Jackson had gone to its nighttime sounds, reduced traffic, distant generators, the particular quiet of a base that had put the day behind it and was gathering for the next one. She thought about her father, about the quality of his patience, the way he could carry difficult things without requiring them to change shape to make the carrying easier. She had been trying to learn that her entire adult life. She opened the folder. She went back to work. General Raymond Stahl arrived at Fort Jackson at 0611 on Tuesday morning, 4 hours and 19 minutes ahead of the scheduled inspection time. His driver had been told 10:30. His advance team had been told 10:30. Fort Jackson had prepared for 10:30 with the combination of genuine readiness and surface polish that military installations brought to scrutiny they knew was coming. Stahl had been running inspections for 11 years. He had learned that the most accurate picture of an installation existed in the hours before it knew it was being observed. He came through the main gate with a single aide and a briefcase. He was 63 years old, Gulf War veteran, 38 years of continuous service. His father had served in Korea. His older brother had stood beside him in the Gulf. The family had a relationship with service that preceded the paperwork by a generation and did not require the paperwork to validate it. He had read the incident reports in the vehicle from Columbia Airport, not just the reports about Crane, all of them. The motor pool incident, the witness statements, both sets of medical logs, the duty officer notation about an audit hold placed on the base financial systems at 2023 hours by a commander with a logistics cover assignment who had been on base for less than 15 hours. He read that last item 3 times. By 0630, he was in Hargrove's office. 2 cups of coffee on the desk. Hargrove had been there since 0545. He had anticipated the early arrival the way men who had known Stahl for 30 years tended to. They spoke for 40 minutes. Hargrove laid out everything in the order he had learned it, without editorializing, without softening the parts that reflected poorly on his command or the parts that pointed toward decisions made above his pay grade. Stahl listened. He asked 4 questions. He did not ask anything twice. When Hargrove was finished, Stahl set down his coffee. "Get Commander Reeves," he said, "and give me the route for the 0900 walkthrough." Dara had been at the terminal since 0445. Her right side had woken her at 0430 with the unhurried insistence of old damage that had learned her sleep schedule. She lay still for several minutes, then got up because stillness had never suited her when her mind was already in motion. By 0530, she had the complete picture. Not interpretation, documentation. 41 pages of requisitions, routing codes, budget line manipulations, and authorizing signatures that described a systematic financial diversion running across 14 months in 17 transactions. Just under $200,000 moved in increments, each calculated to remain beneath the threshold for mandatory secondary review. Patient, precise. The work of someone who understood institutional audit systems from the inside. She printed everything. Put it in the folder beside Gerald Voss's letter. When Hargrove's aide knocked at 0702, she picked up the folder and walked to the colonel's office without hurrying. She found Stahl standing near the window. He turned when she entered. She understood in the first 3 seconds the distinction between a man who held rank and a man who had inhabited it long enough that it had become simply part of what he was, indistinguishable from the rest of him. "Commander Reeves," he said. "General." He studied her in the way she had been studied before by people trying to understand something they lacked complete information about. Not assessment, recognition. He asked her to sit. He said he had read the reports and wanted her account directly. She gave it to him the way she gave all accounts, chronological, specific, without interpretation, where the facts spoke for themselves. When she finished, he looked at the window. "The inspection walkthrough begins at 0900, he said. "I would like you present." She nodded once and understood what he was not saying. The walkthrough moved through Fort Jackson's operational areas in the sequence Stahl's aide had mapped. Training facilities, armory, medical, supply and logistics coordination. By 0920, they were in the main corridor of the administration building. Stahl 2 steps ahead, his aide behind Hargrove to the left, Dara at the edge of the group. Crane was there. He was not supposed to be there. He had been restricted to the medical facility pending review. But he had 17 years of institutional knowledge, and he had spent the night making a calculation. He believed that the only remaining ground where he held any leverage was public ground before the official processing was complete. He believed that rank and procedure and the presence of senior command would create a complexity around whatever Dara had told Hargrove, a formal ambiguity that might buy him time or room. He stepped out of a side corridor directly into the path of the walkthrough, sling on his arm, face carefully composed. He addressed Stahl directly. "Not Hargrove, not Dara. General," he said, "I need to formally request the opportunity to respond to accusations being made against me by an officer whose conduct since arrival has created significant disruption to this installation's operational environment and whose authorization chain for this assignment contains irregularities that warrant review before any further action." Stahl stopped walking. The group stopped with him. The corridor was not empty. Administrative staff were at their stations. 2 enlisted soldiers were passing through with equipment. All of them became still in the particular way of people who understood that something significant was happening around them. Crane continued. He had prepared this. His voice was measured and his language was formal, and he had the specific confidence of a man who had rehearsed something enough times to believe in it. He said he had witnesses to an unprovoked physical altercation. He said there were procedural questions about the audit hold placed the previous evening. He said the circumstances of Commander Reeves's transfer to this installation had not been fully accounted for. He said all of this to Stahl. He did not look at Dara once. Stahl listened to every word. He did not interrupt. He did not shift his weight. He gave Crane the complete professional courtesy of his undivided attention, which was the same complete attention he brought to everything. When Crane finished, Stahl was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to Dara. "Commander," he said. 2 words. The complete transfer of the floor. She looked at Crane for the first time since he had stepped into the corridor. He had to look at her now. He had no choice. She spoke at the volume calibrated for the corridor. Not a performance, not a confrontation. A statement made in a space where people were present in language clear enough that no one would need to ask afterward what had been said. "The authorization chain for my transfer orders carries an irregularity because someone inside this installation generated them using internal access to replicate JISOC administrative formatting conventions," she said. "The irregularity traces to the Logistics Coordination Wing, the same wing where 14 months of financial routing anomalies originate, the same wing where your administrative access is logged on 17 separate dates corresponding to 17 transactions that diverted just under $200,000 from this installation's operational budget." She held his gaze. "The audit hold I requested is not a procedural violation. It is the correct institutional response to documented evidence that has now been in General Stahl's possession since this morning. The documentation is 41 pages and it is specific." The corridor was completely quiet. "You did not come out here to file a complaint," she said. "You came out here because you believe that a public setting in a general's presence would complicate the response. You believe that ceremony and rank would create ambiguity where there is none." The last part she said at the same measured volume with no elevation, no performance. "You have made the same mistake 3 times now. You keep assuming that the setting changes the math." Crane stood without moving. Something in his face had been working through a series of recalibrations since she began speaking, looking for an angle, a counter, some formulation that would shift the weight of the moment. He had not found one. He looked at Stahl. Stahl met his eyes with the expression of a man who had seen many things in 38 years and was looking at one more. It communicated without a single word that the calculation Crane had made in the medical facility the previous night had been based on information that was no longer accurate. Sergeant Crane, Stahl said, "You are restricted to quarters effective immediately pending formal JAG review. The reviewing officer will see you at 1100. Crane said nothing. He had understood somewhere in the last 60 seconds that there was nothing left to say. He turned and walked back down the side corridor he had come from. His footsteps were even. The sling on his arm was the only physical concession to the previous 30 hours. Nobody in the corridor spoke. Stahl looked at the administrative staff, at the 2 enlisted soldiers, at the space the scene had occupied. "Continue," he said to his aide. The walkthrough resumed. Mercer was at the armory checkpoint when the group came through at 0935. He had been briefed on the corridor incident in the 12 minutes between its conclusion and the group's arrival. He watched Dara walk with the group. She was carrying a folder. Her bearing was the same as it had been in the courtyard Monday morning and in the motor pool Monday evening. The same economy of motion. The same absence of anything performed. He watched her right side. The compensation was still there. Small, persistent, unacknowledged. When his station duties were done, he walked back toward the East Logistics Hub by the route that passed the small table near the base of the corridor stairs, where the administrative section maintained a coffee station. He poured a cup, full. He placed it on the flat surface at the base of the stairs where anyone moving between floors would pass it. He left without looking back. The notification of Crane's relief from duty was delivered at 10:45 in the presence of the base JAG officer and a witness from Stahl's staff. Document, signature, instructions about where to be and when. Crane accepted the notification without speaking. He had understood fully now the shape of what had happened over the previous 27 hours, and he understood that speaking would not alter the shape. Burkett, Oakes, and Dillard received formal counseling separately through the afternoon. No charges. The slower consequence of visible presence in the wrong moment, which had no specific expiration. By 1100, the institutional machinery was moving with the particular precision it achieved when it had clear documentation and a general's direct attention. Dara found the coffee at 11:15. She had come downstairs for the first time since 0445, carrying her empty cup from the morning and her keys moving with the purposeful distraction of someone whose mind was several steps ahead of their body. She stopped at the base of the stairs. The cup was still warm. No note, no name. She stood and looked at it. Then she picked it up and held both cups, the empty one and the full one, and understood immediately where it had come from and why there was nothing written on it, because anything written would have diminished it, and whoever had left it understood that. She stood in the stairwell a moment longer than necessary. Then she went back upstairs. Stahl came to her office at 13:30 with a folder different from the one he had brought to the morning meeting. He set it on the desk and sat down across from her. This came from the Pentagon, he said. 4 months in development. They have been waiting for the right person. He described the unit. Small 3 to 6 personnel attached to the Inspector General's office with independent operational authority. The mandate was internal financial crime and military logistics in supply chains across CONUS installations. No combat role, intelligence analysis, documentation, case development. The reason they had been waiting was specific, he said. The unit required someone who could walk into an installation under any cover role and accomplish in hours what a conventional audit team required months to complete. Someone whose file was deep enough that experienced people inside the system did not know to look for them, and someone who could not be bought. Through pressure, through institutional loyalty, through personal relationship, through anything. That last quality, he said, was the differentiator. It could not be built into a person through training or incentive. It was either present or it was not. She picked up the folder and opened it. The front page was a standard assignment offer. Rank unchanged, posting flexible, duration open-ended subject to review. She turned to the second page. The operational mandate listed 18 installations across 9 states. She read through it in the systematic way she read everything line by line to completion before moving forward. At the bottom of the list, added in formatting slightly different from the surrounding text, a notation about expanded jurisdictional authority under specific circumstances. The circumstances were narrow. They applied only when domestic financial irregularities could be linked to funding anomalies affecting classified overseas operations. The language describes circumstances that exactly matched the administrative record surrounding a classified operation in Afghanistan in the fall of 2019. She read the notation twice. Then she set the page down carefully. Stahl was watching her with the kind of complete attention that required nothing from her in return. My father died in 2019, she said. The operational record is classified. The administrative records attached to it, the funding authorizations, the logistics routing the supply chain documentation are not classified in the same manner. She looked at him. I have never had access to those records. I have never requested it because requesting it would have required explaining the personal dimension of the request to an institutional review process. Stahl looked at the window. I have been in this institution for 45 years, he said. I stopped believing in coincidences sometime around 1987. He was quiet for a moment. He wrote me a letter in 2017, Stahl said. After his last official posting before the final assignment, he told me his daughter had been in the program for nearly 20 years and was better at it than he was. He paused on that. He said she had one quality he had spent 30 years trying to teach and found unteachable in most people. He said she could walk into a situation and see what it was actually about, not what it was presenting itself as. He looked at her directly. I owe him that acknowledgement, he said. I am sorry it comes later than it should. She nodded once. In the office on a Tuesday afternoon with the Fort Jackson sounds moving through the walls and the 41 pages now in the hands of the JAG team 2 floors below, she sat with what her father had written about her to a man he had trusted enough to write it to. She picked up the pen and signed. Stahl took the document, placed it in the folder, and stood. Welcome to the unit, Commander, he said. He left without elaborating. That was the right instinct. She sat at the desk for a long time. The afternoon moved across the window in the way afternoon moved without concern for what was happening in the rooms it passed. The training fields were visible in the distance. A unit finishing its afternoon session, figures moving in the settled way of people who had been working hard and were coming to the end of it. The light was going amber at the western edge of the sky. She thought about her father. Not about the file, not about what the notation at the bottom of the second page might eventually show her when she had the access to look. She thought about the quality of his patience, the way he had been able to carry difficult things without requiring the things to change shape to make the carrying easier. He had done that across 31 years of service in places that asked everything of a person. He had done it and come home, and when he came home, he had poured coffee and sat in the kitchen and put his hand briefly on her shoulder. She thought about Gerald Voss writing a name in careful handwriting and placing it in a drawer, keeping it for years with the particular faith that the right moment would eventually present itself. She thought about Leo Voss carrying that letter across a posting assignment and sitting with it through a night that had asked something significant of him and then arriving at her door and setting it on the desk. The shape of what her father had built was still standing. It was standing in her in the 41 pages in Leo Voss's decision to walk toward an investigative branch rather than stay where the noise was. Voss knocked at 1600, third time in 2 days. She had known in the particular way she knew things about people after sustained observation that he would come once more. He entered without his cover. He was holding a small piece of paper folded once. He set it on the edge of the desk. When I looked through everything last night before I sealed the envelope again, he said I found this behind the pages. It was not part of the letter. It was separate, folded differently. She looked at the paper. I did not read it, he said, but I could see through the fold that it was a name. Your name. Not Ghost, your actual name. He looked at her. I think he found out at some point, he said. He kept it separate because he thought you might want to be the one who decided what to do with it. She picked up the paper. She did not open it yet. I heard about the assignment, Voss said. People here talk. She waited. I am putting in for JAG, he said. Investigative branch. I have been thinking about it since I arrived. This week finished the thinking. He was 22 years old and standing in a decision the way someone stood in a decision made with the whole of themselves and not being reconsidered. Your father would think that was right, she said. I think he would, Voss said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he used to tell me that the only way to truly honor someone who did something for you was to become the kind of person who did it for someone else. She held that. Go, she said. Get some sleep. He nodded. He turned to leave. Voss, she said. He stopped. Your father was a careful man, she said. What he wrote down mattered. What you carried here mattered. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. He left without another word, which was the right way to leave it. She sat alone. She opened the folded paper. Her full name written in Gerald Voss's careful hand, and below it one line. He talked about you like you were the thing he was most proud of. He never said it like that, but you could tell. She read it once. She set it face up on the desk. Outside the window, Fort Jackson was moving into its evening. The training fields empty, now the last unit long dispersed. The amber in the western sky had deepened towards something that would eventually become dark but was not dark yet. She thought about a beach in Coronado in 1994. She was 21. He was 46. Both squinting against the light that came off the water in the particular way it came off that water. His hand on her shoulder, not arm around, not embrace, just the weight of it. The specific communication of that weight, which did not need words and had never needed them. She had spent 26 years learning to carry things the way he carried them, with patience and without requiring them to be different than they were. She was still learning. She would probably always be still learning. A man named Gerald Voss, a specialist in the 1st Cavalry Division, had been on a 3rd floor in Fallujah in November of 2007, and he had come home and he had lived 13 more years, and he had used them. He had written down what he witnessed because he was the kind of man who wrote things down. He had addressed the letter to Ghost because Ghost was the only person he was certain could not be bought. His son had carried the letter across a base assignment and through a week that asked something real of him and had set it on her desk. The shape of what her father had given her was still standing. It was standing in her and in the 41 pages and in Leo Voss walking toward JAG instead of staying where the noise was. That was what legacy actually was, not the record behind the encryption. The shape that a person's choices made in the people who came after them, visible or not acknowledged, or not regardless of whether the person was present to see it. She placed Gerald Voss's note carefully inside the folder with his letter and the printed documentation. She looked at the photograph on her desk. She had brought 3 items to this temporary posting the way she brought 3 items to every temporary posting. The photograph was one of them. Coronado 1994, both squinting, his hand on her shoulder. She put her hand flat against the cold glass of the window. Fort Jackson below was settling into itself. Lights coming on in the barracks, a single vehicle moving along the perimeter road, the quiet of a base that had put a complicated day behind it and was gathering for the next one. In the distance, the tree line that separated the installation from the civilian road was going dark. At the edges, the specific deep green that preceded night in South Carolina in late summer. She had not planned to still be here past Tuesday. She had planned in the loose way she planned temporary assignments to do the work, produce the documentation, hand it to the appropriate people, and move forward. She had learned over 25 years that plans made before you understood the actual shape of a situation were mostly placeholders. The situation here had a different shape than it had presented. What she had found in 36 hours was not what anyone had told her to look for. It was 14 months of institutional betrayal and a young corporal with his father's careful handwriting, and a general who had known her father well enough to send her a letter in 2017, and a cup of coffee at the base of a stairwell with nothing written on it. And at the bottom of an assignment offer a notation that pointed toward a classified administrative record in Afghanistan she had been waiting 5 years to be able to read. She lowered her hand from the glass. She turned from the window. She sat back down at the terminal. She opened the file for the first installation on the unit's operational list. Fort Drum, New York. Logistics and Supply Chain Audit. Flag. 18 months of anomalous routing in the equipment procurement chain. 2 contacts in the JAG investigative division who had been working the case from the outside for 7 months. The same shape as what she had found here. The same patient-careful institutional exploitation of systems designed to catch large irregularities but blind to small, consistent ones. She read through the preliminary case file with the complete attention she brought to everything that mattered. There were 17 more installations after this one. She had work to do.